Hello, I'm the mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, and now including Amazing Fantasy number 15. Is there anything left to count, Dan? I mean, you can count and argue with me if you want. Go for it.
You know, Mark, I'm the Dapper Dan Gavasan. I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man. I don't own Amazing Fantasy 15. It's still a fantasy to me. But I did own the annuals first, and I will still continue to argue that they count. So call me pedantic if you want, but the annuals count, and that Amazing Fantasy 15 is just a nice little badge in a separate collection.
You can cry into your annuals about it, Dan. I will let you have this fight, okay? You just keep scratching and clawing for it, okay?
I will. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for the 6th episode of Season 6 of the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, which I can do by going into my comic book closet, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app.
I will never know how Spider-Man got his power set. But this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep our podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Every episode of this season features artwork by comic artist Nick Cagnetti and is available to our Patreon members unlettered and in stunning high resolution.
In this season of the Amazing Spider Talk, we're going back to the mid-'80s when the Amazing Spider-Man title was handed over to one of the most legendary creative pairings in comics, who were just starting a creative partnership. That's none other than Tom DeFalco and Ron Frenz. It was a time of immense change in the comics industry, but together, Tom and Ron returned Spider-Man to its Ditko-inspired roots to create one of the most beloved runs on the title.
Yes, and on today's show, we're going to be talking about Spider-Man's first official alternate costume. No, we're not talking about What If, number 1, where he wore a Fantastic Five outfit, or the time when he was in Germany, where Spider-Man stole a fake costume out of a store. So stop typing that angry email about how wrong we are. We know who you are who's typing that angry email. No, we are instead talking about Spider-Man's black costume, the single most audacious and yet beloved upgrade to a classic superhero costume of all time. Love it, hate it, whatever. The black suit and Spider-Man are like peanut butter and jelly, or chocolate and peanut butter, or whatever. It's just the blackberry kind of it, whatever. Although I guess there's no blackberry peanut butter. Whatever, just go with it. Peanut butter and jelly, blackberry jelly, Spider-Man's black costume. Cut me off, Dan.
Yes, Mark, that's right. But let's be clear, we're talking about the costume itself and not the full details of the stories it has appeared in. For that, I recommend checking out our Essentials episode number 27, where Mark and I discuss Amazing Spider-Man number 252, technically the first appearance of the black suit, a story called Homecoming, and we get into our thoughts on all of that stuff. Plus, in our interviews with Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco, all the way back in our Superior Spider Talk days, which you can find in our back issues feed, that has all of our discussions with them about the stories they created involving the black suit. Plus, we discussed the introduction of the black suit in the pages of Secret Wars in Season 5, Episode 10 of our show. And we're going to also today discuss some of the adaptations of the black suit introductory arc. So for that, I'd recommend checking out my interviews with John Semper Jr. about the Spider-Man the Animated Series show, where we discuss how that adapted this story. But yes, we're going to be specifically talking, again, about some of the details in these stories. We're not going to be summarizing them. We're really just talking about the costume. But if you really want to read and know the full context, check out Marvel Superhero Secret Wars number 8 and Amazing Spider-Man numbers 252 to 258, which are largely considered the introductory stories of the Spider-Man black suit. So, Mark, people have seen the movies, they've seen a black suit, they've seen the TV show, they've seen a black suit. If they're anticipating the new Marvel's Spider-Man 2 video game. They've seen the black suit. If you've opened any Spider-Man comic in the 90s and late 80s, you probably saw the black suit. It's a big part of Spider-Man's legacy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of this costume?
Absolutely, Dan. And I do want to note, like, just from your intro, just the sheer number of times that we've talked about the black suit and the stories around it, it just kind of gives credence to the idea of just how impactful this little costume ended up being. But we're going to talk about it one more time because we love the black suit. This came up in our 400th episode during our trivia contest with Tristan, where he actually asked us about this, and I wish we had recorded this first because the information would have been fresher in my mind, Dan. But
Yeah.
Alas, but where did the black suit come from? And this actually came from our conversation with Tom DeFalco back in 2013, so 10 years ago. In the early 1980s, there was a fan, Randy Schuler, who submitted an idea for a new black costume that was to be created by Reed Richards. It was going to be made from the same unstable molecules as the Fantastic Four costume, except, this was going to let Spider-Man do things bigger and better. Like he was going to be able to stick to walls 25% better or something like that. Like even when Schuler tells the story, he doesn't have the exact details. And DeFalco, when we interviewed him, he was just kind of like, I don't know. He could climb faster or something or jump higher. I'm doing my best DeFalco imitation there. My hoo-ha. But either way, this black suit was going to be something bigger and better. He was going to be able to control the webbing with his mind, a la like the Iron Man, Iron Spider thing that we got later on. Jim Shooter, the editor-in-chief of Marvel, he liked it. He paid $220 for it. He also offered Schuler an opportunity to write the script. Tom DeFalco, who was the Spider Book editor at the time, he worked with Schuler, but they really couldn't find something that clicked. I mean, it just sounds like they really couldn't get a story to work in real comic book terms.
The funny thing about it is, you can, in terms of a historian's account of this, almost every version of the story is accounted for, or every documentation of it is accounted for, except for the initial pitch. You can read and find a scan of the letter that Jim Shooter sent to Randy, offering to pay him for the idea. And, eventually Schuler submitted 2 drafts or outlines of a story that he wanted to write, which was eventually published in Sensational Spider-Man Self-Improvement #1, crazy title, which was this crazy B-title book that was released in 2019 with no fanfare. In fact, yeah. I think you didn't pick it up at the time. Have you since picked it up?
I have not. So you can lord that over me if you wish, Dan.
I'm not going to, because it's really obscure, but I do recommend everybody check it out if you like the history of the black suit. And it's also got a great Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz backup story in it that I would say is one of their best creative pairings in 11 pages. But they actually print Randy Schuler's 2 drafts in that book. And then they brought on Peter David and Rick Leonardi to adapt Randy's work. And I believe that on our show, Ron Frenz said he was originally offered that but turned it down. I might be getting the specifics of that incorrect. But it's funny because even then, even with those 2 drafts and the challenge of specifically adapting Randy's original, submission, Peter David, I think, still didn't like it and completely changed the idea yet again. But, you can go and read those, in that comic, but which, again, is called Sensational Spider-Man Self-Improvement. It's a great comic. But just to give you a summary of the changes there, a lot of it is what Mark described. He's a little bit stronger. He's a little bit faster. The kind of thing that comic nerds would look on the back of a trading card from the 90s and be like, right. He's got a power set of 7 out of 10, but now he's got a 9 out of 10.
Exactly.
But in this, it's like Janet Van Dyne along with the Fantastic Four that provide the suit to Spider-Man. Reed Richards obviously, providing the tech element that you described, the faster, better, stronger, billion-dollar man, and the unstable molecules. But it was like Janet Van Dyne's costume, like sensibilities and design that made it black. And I think Randy Schuler's reasoning behind that was, oh, well, Janet showed up like every other issue in Avengers in a new costume. So, of course, she would be the one redesigning it. And it's quite a different design. It has like a big red spider on the chest instead of the iconic white one. And Randy wanted the web pits to come back, which is funny because like the one in the new upcoming video game, it still has the white spider, but it's got the web pits. So it's somewhere in between Randy's design and the final design. And you can see the iterations of that design evolve over the years. Tell us a little bit about where it went to next after it got into Marvel's hands.
Well, right. So, I mean, obviously, until 2019, the script wasn't going to go anywhere. But about a year later, in like '84, Marvel was starting to develop its first big event, Secret Wars, to coincide with an action figure line. I mean, Jim Shooter denies that it's a toy book, but let's be real here. It's a toy book, okay?
Jim Shooter denies a lot of things, Mark.
I mean, it's a toy book, okay, guys? Anyway. But they wanted something really interesting for Spider-Man, to sell more action figures. So he was like, let's get back the new suit. So he wanted to basically kick around the black costume idea again without Randy Schuler's involvement. So he sent it over to Mike Zeck and Rick Leonardi to work up a new draft. And thus the black suit as we know it was created. And I'm trying to remember, Dan, did Leonardi talk about this a little bit in your interview with him a couple of years ago, or did we save that for thinking maybe he'd come on for this episode?
Yeah, I mean, just to be honest, we were trying to get Rick on this episode and he agreed to do it, and things it took a long time to pull it together. And in the meantime, we were like, well, I think we've covered this, and we don't want to spend Rick's time because he's always been generous with us. And he also downplayed in the emails with us his role in the design. I think he's said that, he just broke up the legs a little bit differently and expanded the length of them around the suit, whereas like Mike Zeck really was the chief champion of the design of the costume. And you can look up design, early designs where it still has the red spider on the page design. So, I think Rick made some minor tweaks, but he wouldn't credit himself as the designer of the suit. And, he deserves whatever credit he earned, which, is mentioned here. But I think it's honorable for him to really lay the full design at Mike Zeck's feet if he really feels like Mike contributed the most to it.
Yeah. Well, so stop me if you've heard this one before, Dan. So, we have a design costume and Marvel is ready.
Stop. No, keep going.
Marvel is ready to unveil this new costume, but wait, here's the shocking part, Dan. Fans, even in the era before social media, they caught wind of this new costume and they allegedly hated it. They were like, no, you must change it back to whatever it was. Like Spider-Man was always married and he's always in red and blue. No, I don't. Basically, and this is per our interview with our first interview ever with Tom DeFalco. Jim Shooter basically went to Tom and was like, all right, we got to nix the black suit. And DeFalco's like, it's in Secret Wars. So the way they wanted to introduce it is they were going to introduce it first in Amazing Spider-Man 252, which was going to release about 6 to 8 months before Secret Wars 8. It was all like supposed to coincide, and Secret Wars 8 was where he was supposed to get the costume. So DeFalco was like, I got to at least write 7 issues worth of comics here to align with Secret Wars 8 coming out and showing Spider-Man get the costume, and Shooter was like, all right, fine, but as soon as Secret Wars 8 is out, we gotta nix the costume. So that brought us to the storyline 252 to 258, aka Homecoming, or whatever you want to call it, and of course 258, the last issue in that storyline. It's the great cover, the Ron Frenz cover of the two costumes, tearing Peter across, apart in kind of like the downward spiral. I love that. It's one of my favorite covers from that era. And Spider-Man was going to ditch the black costume at the end of the run. But wait, stop me if you heard this one, Dan. Despite the that angry majority of fans that just dictate what stories should be, apparently when 252 came out, it was also popular. I mean, maybe it's just the people who buy Spider-Man anyway, as I'm told, is what happens. I don't know. I'm having fun right now, guys. I admit it. But anyway.
Mark, this is a new trend. Is every episode you're gonna find a way to dig your heels in on this?
Anywho, but no, 252 was like this huge release, and people, it was like the hottest book at the time. So like Ron Frenz, when we interviewed him, or when you interviewed him,
still a hot book.
Oh well, yes. I mean, for sure. Yeah. But like it was like selling for like $50 apparently, like the month it came out. And Ron Frenz apparently said he was at a comic book show in Canada the month it came out, and they had to shut the convention floor down for fire safety because so many people wanted this book. I look. That was again,
and because the symbiote doesn't like fire. That's the truth. Yeah,
that's very true too. But I mean, look, I do question a little bit of the truthiness of that Ron Frenz storyline, but he said it on the show, so it's gospel to us. But so that, from there the phenomenon began. So do you want to talk a little bit about from the factual standpoint, what exactly was the phenomenon here, Dan?
Yeah, sure. First, I want to remark on what you just said, which is very funny that Tom DeFalco was like, I got to string this along for 7 issues, which basically says the expectation was that the costume was there to stay for a prolonged period of time, to suddenly scuttle it to 7 issues and go back, which is funny because nowadays if a costume lasts that long, it's kind of amazing. I mean, I guess we're in the middle of the Osborn suit right now, lasting, 30 some issues right now. But prior to that, I would say everybody is deeply cynical about costumes that last 6 issues and then disappear. Whereas the most iconic one of them really was only around for a brief period of time and was scuttled to be around that and still left a lasting imprint. Yeah. We could talk about the later versions of it, but anyway, I said it, and you're talking about the facts. I think it is a fact, and write in if you disagree. But I would be hard pressed for you to correct me on this. I think this is the greatest costume change in superhero comics history. I don't think there's another suit. Don't come at me with blue Superman or whatever,
Also Ron Frenz.
Yes. Also Ron Frenz. Don't come with me lemon lime Superman, people. Okay, I don't think that there is a true alternate costume that is as popular. And to that point, you can kind of see a demarcation point here for Spider-Man, which is look, we all know the red and blue is classic. The black and white became alt classic. But, this is the new Coke or whatever you want moment. I guess New Coke didn't hang around, but, I don't know, Cherry Coke, also a classic. But now, there are a million variations on Coke. You can go to those machines and mix and match vanilla, orange Coke, whatever you want. I think from this point, alternate costumes became a staple of Spider-Man storytelling, to the point that it's kind of been watered down. And like I just said, if something lasts for a while, it becomes kind of a standout. But also I would say it's kind of become the basis for Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse really was created out of like an existence of so many alternate suits,
Yeah.
and therefore alternate Spider-Man. And so I think this is kind of that inception point for all of these ideas. Not anybody can wear a mask. There's thousands of different masks, and even in Spider-Verse, we go down to the spider lair, and there's all those different costumes. Like
Yeah.
it is what we want to call a canon event that
Yeah.
Spider-Man wears different suits. Curious to hear your response to all
No,
that.
that's really funny, Dan, because very recently I was going back through like some old blog posts that I made on Chasing Amazing, and I got stuck on my write up for Superior Spider-Man 32, which I don't know if you remember. So that was the first of the 2 issues that came out after the initial run of 31 issues of Superior Spider. It was basically a prelude to Spider-Verse in 2014. And one of the things in my grouchy old man way that I was kind of complaining about in that blog post was like, they were kind of like introducing a bunch of alternate Spider-Mans as cannon fodder for the Inheritors, but like it was basically just like, here's a Spider-Man in a black costume, here's a Spider-Man in the stealth costume from Big Time, and I was like, how is this an alternate Spider-Man? And like, and people in the comments, I very rarely got like angry internet comments on my blog posts, but this one invited it, and they were just like, dummy, this is from an alternate timeline where he kept the costume, and I'm like, it's just using a costume as like I understood the mechanics of it, but I just thought it was like, for me, like when I think of alternate timeline Spider-Man, I'm thinking of like Spider-Man Noir or Spider-Man India, or you know what I mean, like someone from a legitimately different universe who has his own storyline, not just like basically a bunch of like never published what if stories of like, well, what if Spider-Man kept his Future Foundation costume 3 more issues later than he did in you know what I mean, like, so. But yes, to you, I am agreeing with you. But I also want to add, I find it to be lazy storytelling to present like an alternate costume.
I didn't say I liked it. I just said
sure.
it's true. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I'm adding my opinion to it, and also defending a blog opinion from 9 years ago, because I am who I am to my core.
You hear that? Get off Mark's lawn.
I mean, seriously, like the pain still hurts that you disagreed with me 9 years ago, people. Anyway,
did you find my name in the credits to that comment section?
No. You once we started podcasting together, you very rarely gave me a hard time about my blog posts. I mean, so kudos to you for that.
You guys don't know what kind of tightrope I'm walking here.
There you go. You gotta manage the angry ego of Mark. Like, no, we're not going to talk about the stories of 252 to 258, but like, I always found it interesting, and I have always personally thought, and I don't know how you feel about this, Dan, like I always think of this storyline as almost like a second origin for Spider-Man, because it's like the way it's written. I mean, the fact that even the cover of 252 is a direct homage to Amazing Fantasy 15, which I own now. I don't know if you heard that, Dan, but gotta throw
guys,
that in.
this is what it's going to be like from now on. Just a constant name drop of
I know.
Amazing Fantasy 15. I hope you're prepared for years of this.
But in all seriousness, it always, like, yes, it's clearly not an origin in that, like, the power, everything is established in terms of who Spider-Man and who Peter is, but like, you're trying to find out what the deal is with this costume. Like, they're laying like breadcrumbs throughout that there's something amiss with this costume, that Peter's kind of going out in the middle of the night, doesn't remember it. At the same time, we're kind of like reintroducing, like, or not even reintroducing, we're introducing new villains, a new street level thing. Like, like they're these very grounded kind of Ditko-esque stories. So it just, in that regard, like, I think it adds to the popularity that the stories that the suit is associated with are kind of like a good entry point to Spider-Man for people. Like it's like, if you miss the first 25 years of Spider-Man, this is a great place to jump in, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And speaking of beginnings, this black suit story was really used to kick off a new B title, Web of Spider-Man, which we're going to be talking about later in this season. And just as like a prelude to that eventual episode and conversation, if you haven't read the first few issues of Web of Spider-Man, they're actually really fun stories that are really kind of core parts of the establishment of the black suit and the relationship with the symbiote. Not just because Eddie Brock's hand appears there for the first time,
Right.
if you count that, but I just think they're fun stories, and I think they get kind of like forgotten about. I mean, I didn't mention them in the intro to this episode, but I also discovered them later on, in my full reading of Spidey World. So I just wanted to point out like that spawned out of this, but also those are cool stories. Check them out.
Yeah. And I think, you alluded to it in terms of the symbiote, which is what, the black suit ends up being. It's an alien that is like hosting, is latching onto Spider-Man or Peter as a host. It's worth noting that, Roger Stern, before leaving Amazing Spider-Man, he was the one who actually pitched the idea, like not to make it a costume or even an alien costume, but to make it like alive and potentially evil. Which I always feel like, I mean, that's the wrinkle that makes it, right? I mean, like if it's
Yeah.
just a costume, okay, it looks cool and you can jump 25% higher, but like it's the conflict that the costume itself brings that elevates this into a higher level of storytelling here. And then I also think it's a very Spider-Man-esque situation. I mean, like, we could talk about him bringing the alien back, and from the beyond, is it the Beyond World or Beyonder World or whatever, or Battle World? I always
Battle World,
Battle
yeah.
World. I'm sorry, I'm confusing my Secret Wars esque. But like, we could talk about him bringing that back, and of course what the suit becomes in terms of Venom and all that. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But like, just in general, like, is it not just the most stereotypical Spider-Man thing that, like, he gets a new suit, but like he's in conflict with the suit? Like, I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like this is like Spider-Man to a T. It's like it's always something. It's never easy.
I want to talk about the look of the suit because and I don't. This is not in our outline, so but like I'm curious how you respond to this.
Yeah.
Forget the symbiote ever existed. He just got a new costume, and forget the hate mail. Like he just
Yeah.
showed up in a new costume. Like frankly, I think the black suit is far more spider-esque or arachnid-like,
Sure.
or how you would associate with it. Like what if you were to imagine Spider-Man? Like I think the black suit is much more the platonic ideal of like what that character would look like, right? Do
Yeah.
you think that this suit would have had like staying power? Given or remove the narrative wrinkles, like it's just an attractive suit that looks cool and feels very Spider-Man. Like with the 2020 hindsight or whatever removed, like I think this suit could have had real staying power.
I think if it's introduced in the era that it's introduced without the extra frills, yes. I think if this was like what Spider-Man looked like from the get-go, it wouldn't have worked. I think like the color and like kind of the fantasy of it is what I think helped popularize Spider-Man and helped popularize superhero comics in the Silver Age. But like for the record, even without the alien, evil storyline, like I feel like the black suit here kind of lends itself to the darker, grittier storytelling that was starting to emanate in comics during this era. We talked about it during, of course, our Death of Gene DeWolf episode, and yes, I mean, of course, DeFalco and Friends, they were not necessarily of the darker creator variety. They were more of the hoo-ha style creators, but at the same time, like I'm thinking back to like there is kind of like a Dark Knight element to a dark suit Spider-Man. Like he can kind of crawl around in the middle of the night and bust up burglars and criminals and defend the streets of New York and be use his power responsibly. It doesn't mean he's a bad guy, but like there's more of an edge to a black suit Spider-Man that I feel like, yeah, again, going back to your original question, like even without the added drama and conflict of the suit, would work in this era. I don't think it would work in the Silver Age, though.
Well, I mean, I could see a real like good justification of the practicality of it, like you were describing, being like if he's going on an adventure at nighttime, he wears this costume.
Right.
If he's going on an adventure during the daytime, it's the red and blues. I could see that as a justification were this to continue. And obviously he would wear a black suit again, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I guess the other thing I would ask is, we consider this an alt costume. Like if it were to switch over, like it could, I guess, become the main. I'm thinking about like, we don't consider like the red and gold an alt Iron Man costume. It is the costume, even though it wasn't the debut costume. Same with Daredevil and the yellow outfit switching to red. Like, is there even an option 252 issues into Spider-Man to change that baseline, in the way that Daredevil and Iron Man did? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, that's an interesting concept. I mean, the thing is, and not to reveal the sausage making, I'm jumping around the outline here a little bit. I do feel like once it became clear that people liked the suit, they did kind of try to walk that line, because like then it was like, well, he can wear a black suit without it being an alien, right? Like let's have Felicia Felicia Hardy, notorious homemaker and homebody who could sew costumes, just like Peter sewed his original costume. I mean, everyone can sew in the Marvel universe. I mean, like
it's the secret superpower of like, what is it now? Everybody knows how to tell true north. After the events of House of M.
Yes. I mean, look, I had to sew once in 7th grade to pass my home economics class, and like, you don't want to see what that pillow looked like, Dan. That's all I'm gonna say. But like, yeah. So like, but I do feel like they tried to push it as far as they could, that this was almost a permanent change, until for storyline purposes, aka the Venom of it all, they kind of undid it and went back to the traditional. Although, as it turns out, as Jim Salicrup, former Marvel's or Spider editor, said many times, going back to the red and blues for Todd McFarlane was kind of one of the conditions that got him to work on the book. So maybe it could have just kept going the way you described it. I mean, like it's an interesting, now talk about a what if. I mean, right? I mean, but I feel like they pushed it as close as they could in terms of it being a permanent status quo.
I mean, and visually it makes sense, right? Like Felicia in her white and blacks and Spider-Man in his white and blacks. Like when that couple was defining the comics, like it made sense to market it that way. But let's get to the Venom of it all. I mean, you are a beloved fan of Amazing Spider-Man 300, although I think you and I both agree 299 is the first appearance. But
correct.
Yes. Whichever way it cuts, Venom changed the trajectory of this whole thing. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not revealing any scintillating news here, but I mean, like, Venom.
You guys have all heard of Venom, right? Like,
were you the one struggling with V during the
I was, yeah.
Let's who starts with V, and I'm sitting here being like, Venom. For
the record, Venom was written on my board, and my brain just blew up in that moment. But that'll haunt me for the rest of the show's history. But anyway, continue, Mark.
So I mean, like, yes, I mean, Amazing Spider-Man number 300 is a personal favorite of mine, in large part because it was one of the first Spider-Man comics that I got. I mean, like, I just remember being so blown away by the storyline. But like, take a step back here. It's also, I would describe it as probably one of the biggest certainly one of the biggest Spider-Man comics ever, and maybe one of the biggest comics ever. Period. I mean, it's one of the most popular comics released in the last 30 years, right? I mean, like, is it or 35 years? I mean, I'm dating myself now. I mean, like, is there any question that this book is like, you know, if it's the biggest non-Silver Age book in comic book history at this point in terms of its popularity, its collectability, its everything?
I would have agreed with you every day for the past 10 years that we've known each other. And I doubly agree with you the minute that the Venom movie made over $1 billion. How do you argue against that? Yeah.
Right. And let's not forget that No Way Home ends with the symbiote being left behind by Eddie Brock, and so like we're gonna do it again, and we'll talk about the adaptations in a little bit, but like the fact of the matter is Venom is Amazing Spider-Man number 300, which marked the first appearance of, or the first full appearance of Venom, is one of the biggest comics ever. And Venom himself is probably the biggest Spider-Man villain, or maybe even the biggest comic book villain, not created by Ditko or Kirby. And in terms of the Ditko Spider-Man rogues, I would rank him probably behind Green Goblin and Doc Ock in terms of just impact, popularity, all of that stuff. Like I don't even know how you can place anyone else above him at this point besides those two.
It's hard to parse out because he's kind of taken on a life as an anti-hero, and that's allowed him to grow outside of the realms of Spider-Man. So it will be interesting to find out how much of Venom's pop culture knowledge is associated with Spider-Man. I mean, I think people obviously know him from Spider-Man 3, but I think there's generations of people that just know him as his own character, absent from Spider-Man. I would be very curious. I mean, the cartoons obviously do a lot to reinforce the link between Spider-Man and Venom, but it's a really interesting question to kind of get at. Has that character gotten to a trajectory that he's removed himself from the orbit of Spider-Man? I'd be curious to find out.
Right. And of course, it's also worth noting, via Venom, we begot Carnage and Toxin and all these other symbiote characters. I mean, on and on and on and on. It's like you can debate the merits of whether this is good creative process in terms of how we're creating villains for Spider-Man, but regardless, the black costume is kind of where all roads lead back to in terms of modern storytelling in this regard.
Is the test that you get your own standalone movie? Because Kraven the Hunter and Morbius are finding out that they can't. I mean, I don't know how the Kraven movie is going to do. I can't imagine very well, but they're trying to see if they can escape the trajectory of Spider-Man. Anyway, that's another topic for another day. So, Venom came on the scene and in a very memorable moment of accosting MJ, and different versions will tell you different iterations of what actually transpired in that apartment. There's a Zeb Wells story about that. And I think in the original comics, it doesn't really appear to be much more than showing up and threatening her. We even got a reference back to that in Amazing Spider-Man 800.
Yes.
But that would change the trajectory of Peter and the black suit. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, that whole scene made MJ. MJ was like, Peter, you got to ditch the suit, and the legend begins anew at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 300. As I mentioned, Salicrup basically said that was McFarlane's carrot to do Amazing Spider-Man. So I mean, it's so funny. The guy who made helped make Venom a visual phenomenon is the same one who's like, I don't want to do the black suit anymore. So, but I even though the red and blue came back and was at that point the full-time suit, it was it felt like whenever the black suit made another appearance in this comic, it was an event, right? I mean, it was just this was a big deal that he was doing this again. And usually denoted like a darker version of Peter, even though like, and we could talk about this vis-a-vis the adaptations. Um, when Peter is wearing the black suit, well, certainly even the even when he was wearing the symbiote, we never really got the impression in those initial stories that it was like affecting his mood or his behavior or his demeanor in a way. I mean, like he was going out and not remembering it, but like he wasn't like accidentally killing people or anything like that. And that's something that has become a part of the mythos. But like even from a thematic standpoint, like I think of things like Back in Black or Amazing Spider-Man number 800, or when it feels like Superior Venom during the Superior Spider-Man arc, like when it felt like whenever Peter threw on the black costume again, it was like he means business, and he might be testing his moral code and testing the limits of what he's willing to do. I mean, like it was always around like a major storyline where regular old friendly neighborhood Spider-Man wasn't going to be good enough. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are basically that you're seeing how the adaptations are seeping back into the comic.
Yeah.
Like because that was never a part. The suit never influenced Peter's mood or anything like that, other than it being truly just a symbiotic relationship. It did not want to let Peter go, and it only became bad when it was like a spurned lover, so to speak. So, that's really an invention of the adaptations, and I think a really cool one. And fine. Like, I'm okay with that. I do think that it it kind of undermines the power of the returns of the black suit. I mean, very rarely has the black suit come back, and I think really earned coming back, given what it means. It just seems like you're right. It's like a color swap to make him darker. And I like it in Back in Black. I think it's really cool to see Peter like on the run and wearing something black, maybe to avoid attention and to like become more Batman like, where it's like I'm wearing this suit as an intimidation tool. Right. Because that's the whole idea of that arc, is that he is wearing it to intimidate Kingpin and make a threat. And in that instance, I think it makes the most sense. It's not suggesting, I mean, his attitude is changed because Aunt May just got shot. But like, I think it has a practical purpose. Whereas some of the other stuff, I mean, I guess it's practical in the Red Goblin arc, right? He needs it to power up and fight Carnage and stuff like that. So they don't quite have that same kind of edge that we now associate with the thing. So it's like it kind of makes the comic version a little bit weaker as a result. It's kind of in need of like a new Venom story to spice up that relationship again, but we can talk about that later. Speaking of adaptations, and push back on me on this if you feel otherwise. I think this story is probably the most adapted storyline of all Spider-Man comics. Yeah. I would say even including the origin, because a lot of the times they just skip over the origin, right, and don't tell it, but they always get around to telling the Venom story. Like, it would actually be funny in like a new Spider-Man movie if he just showed up wearing the black suit and he was like, "You all know where I got this," and the way that they handled the Uncle Ben thing. I mean, it's kind of funny. You can't do that, which is to say, like, I think that they really couldn't skip the Uncle Ben thing, and I think they realized that by the time they got to No Way Home. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, am I exaggerating how much the story has been adapted?
No, and to your point, I was going to say, like, yeah, like they can hand wave the origin, but that's the thing. I don't think they want to hand wave the black suit. I feel like, I feel like we're in an era now, and I mean, and by era, I'm saying this goes back now 25, 30 years at least at this point, probably starting with like the Spider-Man animated series with John Semper that you alluded to, where like I feel like creators, they're almost like, it's like, how do I do the black suit saga is kind of like their litmus test for like how they're going to tell stories. I mean, like it's like, you know, you got a new version of Spider-Man, whether it's animated series, whether it's a new comic series like Ultimate Spider-Man, when, you know, Bendis and Bagley were doing it. You know, they of course did their Venom storyline. Obviously Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi. We're going to see it again in the Tom Holland movies, it would appear. Like it's like this is a benchmark for creators now. It's like how do you do the black suit? How are you going to show, you know, whether it's Venom or not Venom, however you want to do it, how are you going to show this transition and what it means and its impact? I think in terms of the origin, it's like it's probably played out for most people. And I think it has something frankly to do with the age of the people creating the content at this point. I mean, you know, the fact of the matter is, especially now, most of the people creating the content are our age, Dan. So like they grew, like this was the end all be all when it came out. I mean, you know, in terms of like John Semper, obviously he's not our age, but like it was a pretty unique new wrinkle to the Spider-Man mythos that he was able to do something with. So yeah, like I said, I think this is something that like creators want to cut their teeth on and tell that story. If it's not as essential as the origin, it's the second most essential storyline, I think, at this point. Like I think it's even bigger than the Green Goblin storyline in terms of like a Spider-Man villain learning his identity and using that against him to kill his love. I mean, we kind of got that with the Mark Webb movies. I think that's maybe that's third in terms of adapted stories at this point. But like I feel like Venom and the symbiote have surpassed that, which is just mind-boggling to think about, considering, again, we're talking 1985, 86 is where this all started.
I mean, I think like credit, like you said, is due to the people of Spider-Man the animated series, because I really think that is where this true outside of the realm of comics, media, pop culture obsession with Venom really found its way into the minds of children. It's the character. I think it's also due to the design of the character and the suit being so toyetic. You know, to have like the evil alternate Spider-Man. And it's not the first time by a landslide that you would get the evil alternate hero. You know, you Flash, Reverse Flash, Superman, Bizarro, you know, like there's a million of these. Like it is a storytelling trope as old as time. And yet there is something, you know, especially in Marvel with the like evil alternate version of the hero really being birthed with this black suit. You know, like I think even like the reintroduction of the Miss Marvel comic a few years ago, the first arc was her getting like an evil symbiotic like costume. You know, I just think, you know, not to mention that everything has been Venomized at this point. Right. But remember when that was a rare thing? Who are the few people that have worn a symbiote? Now, whatever, everybody.
Yeah.
I think Bendis checked that box when he Venom bombed Manhattan. But I think it, like the animated series elevated it, and then I think from there, Spider-Man 3 incorporated it, and it was just off to the races. Venom was a cornerstone of this character in the series, and like every animated show had to have it. Like, how many toys do you sell of the bad Spider-Man? And you know, there you go. We're off to the races. Mark, we're going to talk about some of those adaptations and our thoughts on the black costume and what it means to us personally in a minute. But why don't you tell our listeners about where they can share their thoughts on the black costume?
Well, Dan, I think you must be talking about our Slack, because hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what's been happening in the Slack this week, which, you know, frankly, given by the time this episode sees the light of day in our main feed, might be a few weeks from now, but whatever. What's happening in the Slack? What's something that you could talk about in the Slack right now?
Well, Mark, I'm so glad you naturally brought up the Slack because I was actually just talking about shouting into the void of space.
Oh,
But
right.
yes,
Yes.
there is a lot of good things going on in Slack, and you can share your thoughts on the black suit there. And actually, this week there's been a lot of talk about the excitement over the new Marvel Spider-Man 2 video game, which by the time you hear this might already be out, and you can play as Peter wearing the black suit. I mean, imagine that. What a great tie-in to this episode. It's like we planned it, except we didn't, because literally, if we release this episode any day of the week, there would likely be a black suit tie-in. That's how ubiquitous this thing is. But, it will be cool to see that story be translated in like such minute detail, in a video game with this level of production quality. It's not the first black suit in the video game by far, but we're talking about maximum carnage and all of that stuff. But I'm really excited to see how it translates there with like the great writers and working on that game. So I know our Slack is buzzing about it, and maybe you guys can all come join in, talk about it in the Slack too, share your experiences with the game. There's a link in the description of this episode that will let you jump into the Slack. It's like our little forum of fun with positive voices and great friendships. And you can get in there in less than a minute and let us know when you sign up so we can all say hi.
Awesome. All right. Well, Dan, why don't, hey, this is our show, so let's talk about our feelings. And by feelings, I mean feelings about the black suit. Personally, what it means to us. I'll go first since I'm the older of the two here. And, like I said, like Amazing Spider-Man number 300, like it's the third comic I bought as a kid. I bought 296 and 297. I skipped those two early McFarlane ones. I wish I didn't because I wouldn't have to go back and buy them. But alas, but 300 was the third book I ever bought. It's, in a lot of ways, it's sometimes hard for me to separate my personal feelings from the actual phenomenon that we discussed about, because it is kind of weird to talk about something that I really felt like I experienced in real time in terms of like its impact, and yet like I kind of have to pull back and think about it in a broader context in terms of like how it's been used and everything. But whatever. I don't have a psychology degree, so I'm going to do the best I can here. Obviously Venom, like, despite the fact that, like, as you alluded to, Venom has certainly gotten a lot of latitude to do his own thing as an anti-hero, and we're obviously going to talk about that a lot, probably next season on this show in terms of what it means. But like, it still felt like a really big deal for many years of my formative like comic book fandom when Venom showed up. And we could talk about, earlier we were like, well, let's remove the venom of it all and the emotions and all that kind of stuff. Like, let's just look at it as a costume and as a design. And it's like, yeah, it's just a black costume, but like Rick Leonardi and Mike Zeck, or Mike Zeck and Rick Leonardi, depending on who's taking credit at the time, they just nailed it. Like, this is like, it's a beautifully simple design. The large spider on the chest is just freaking phenomenal. Like, it's just a great spin on it. I mean, like you alluded to earlier, it just makes too much sense for Spider-Man to have a costume like this. It's more spider-like. The origins of it tie into power and guilt and responsibility and all of the core Spider-Man characteristics. From a collector standpoint, all of those big early appearances of either the black suit or Venom, like, they are some of the most prized in my collection. I could bring up Amazing Fantasy 15 again here, Dan, but I won't. As he laughs through the microphone.
I believe you did just now. Yes.
Oh, okay, my bad. The point is, like, to me, the black suit has earned every bit of being the phenomenon that it is. Like, I buy into the hype of it. We alluded to some of the storylines earlier where it's kind of come back like Back in Black. I actually don't really like Back in Black, but like I remember when that storyline came out in what was it, 2007 or whatever it was, 2006, 2007. Like that book, I was getting the book home shipped to me at that point. That was when I was a home subscriber, when they would not ship me annuals. Just want to mention that because they didn't count as part of the main series. I just remember thinking to myself, like, holy crap, he's putting on the black suit to kick the Kingpin's ass, and I was like, I was there, like I was back to being a 7-year-old. Like this was the greatest thing for me. I'm in my mid-20s at this point, and I'm like, no, hell yeah, I love this. Like, black costume is life, man. Like I love it. Anytime it comes back, I'm a fan. It is far and away the most impactful status quo change in Spider-Man history for me. I don't even know if there's a close second.
Pull the trigger, Mark. If you could swap the black suit in for the red and blue suit, like whatever the story is that makes that the case, and it would be the permanent suit going forward, would you kill the red and blue suit?
I think I might. I'm gonna say yeah. That's my hot take for this episode. Yeah.
All right.
Let's kill it.
That's a hot take.
Let's kill it. It's gone. No more. Black suit forever.
You are welcome to ask me that question when I'm done with my reflections. But yeah, that is a definitive take.
What about you, Dan? What's your overall impressions of the black suit? What does it mean to you?
I mean, it means a lot to me. I really think, I can't credit the comics for this. Like, I think my introduction to the black suit was the animated series. It's really hard to pinpoint that exact moment where it came into my mind because I wasn't reading the comics when it was introduced, and like you, and I wasn't reading the comics when it was undone, a la Venom. Like I came after the story was already complete, and so I think the animated series is where it was first shown to me, and it was really cool. I mean, it lasted very short. I think it's like a 2-episode event where it goes from him wearing it to it being on Eddie Brock, just about as quick as ASM 300 introduced Eddie Brock. But like Venom was an icon to me, and so as such, the black suit was iconic. I don't think it really took on quite the place in my mind from that show. It was more just a ancillary element to Venom until I started like collecting the cards and then picking up Amazing Spider-Man 375, which was my first Spider-Man comic. And of course, that's a very Venom dominant issue, and at the end, it was the end of the Spider-Man Venom feud, right? Venom shape-shifted and wore his new like leather-bound looking suit that lasted for a panel, and then he was off, but in digging into Venom more, though that series and that comic is what really drove me to want to know more about the suit, which led me to the DeFalco Frenz run. And so like I have the show and those comics to thank for my love of the DeFalco Frenz run. But like the minute I was introduced to that, it kind of became the suit for me as a kid. It was just cool, and maybe it was the adult looking nature of it, the darker nature of it that drew me to it as a kid, because as kids you're kind of drawn to things you're not supposed to touch, and it felt dangerous in that way. And also kind of like this special little thing, that existed, not as a permanent state for Spider-Man, but like, remember that one time that like this crazy thing happened, and I think having that knowledge in my brain felt special. I don't know if it was like to lord over other people, but like my knowledge, but like it felt like being part of like a club, I guess, for people that knew this full story behind this cool character of Venom. And I think that's kind of what fueled my early collecting habits, was like, I got to know more about this, and I'll say there's so much I love about that version of Venom that I don't think really exists anymore. The kind of like flat nature to Venom's design. He's almost like paper doll-ish, where he kind of flops around and slithers like a snake. And, I think Spider-Man 3, the movie, and maybe even like Mark Bagley's Venom, with all the tendrils and stuff, kind of erased that conception of the suit where it was really like kind of like a suit, like it existed almost like a fabric. And I think that stuff is cool. I love all the little details to it, like the web shooters on the back of the hands. It's such a neat concept. Like it makes it more aggressive in a way, almost like you're punching your webs. And I like that element, even though it doesn't make any sense for web slinging. You shoot it and then you have to like rotate your wrist back around to grab onto the webbing. I never understood how that was helpful in any way. But yeah, I love the black suit. I think it's just so, you said it, it's cool. I mean, it's just cool. There's no getting around how cool it is. And, frankly, I've always longed for a more prolonged return, of the suit, especially now that the mythos has been built out a bit. Like, I think there is so much ripe material of like Peter as Venom or wearing the black suit and with all the emotionally charged, stuff that means, like especially with Mary Jane's reaction to it. I don't know what the scenario would be where Spider-Man would be like, I don't care what you think. I'm going to wear this outfit that traumatized you in some way. But, and honestly, I think I've talked about it before. If I were to pitch a Spider-Man comic to Marvel, it would be something along the lines of like, what would it mean for Peter to put the costume back on and, in some way. Although I'll admit the symbiote Spider-Man comics by Peter David do almost nothing for me. Yeah. Like they kind of exist outside of nostalgia, which is to say, like, I think most of the returns to this story have diminishing returns. Because I don't feel like the material has ever felt really substantial enough or has dealt with it like in such a big way. It often feels like a marketing push rather than like an emotionally charged character oriented push, other than like maybe back in Black, I feel like if you're going to return Peter to the costume, it needs to be accompanied by a story of serious weight or like time to deconstruct what it means. But I've also loved all of the adaptations over the years. I love what was done with the Venom suit in Ultimate Spider-Man, where it like tied into Peter's childhood, his father, and Eddie Brock and his family, even if that story doesn't really come together by the end. Yeah. I just think it's so ripe for cool potential, and I think it's one of the most interesting modern story elements added to Spider-Man. And it's just a costume. And it would be cool if it was just a costume, too.
Yeah. Do you want?
All right, you going to put the gun to my head, Mark?
I mean, I was going to say, like, your money or your wife. Do you money being the black costume for? I don't know. Black costume. You said you would like a longer term. How about permanent? Like you can just wipe out red and blue forever. In exchange, I'll give you Amazing Fantasy 15. No, what do you got? What do you got?
Well, that changes the deal. Yeah. No, I would not kill red and blue. As much as I would love to see a prolonged return of the blacks, if it was accompanied by a really interesting story, I do think that I like, even just visually, I like the flexibility that the red and blue allows artists to experiment with, whereas I feel like the black, as cool as it is, it has a definitive look. And yeah, like Humberto Ramos changed it up in issue 800 in a neat way, and put his stamp on it. And yeah, people have put their stamps on it, but the flexibility of like how you shape the eyes and the webbing and stuff for the red and blue, I think is unsurpassable. Like it's just like a really visually exciting comic for artists to adapt. I don't think I could give up seeing a new artist take a spin on the red and blues for the coolness of the black.
All right. Well, I don't know if we got anything else to say. Do you wanna sprint to the finish here, Mr. Dan?
Yeah, let's do it, Mark.
All right. Well, that means it's time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, of course, if you enjoyed this podcast and this conversation, know that this podcast exists because of our listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including new Amazing Spider-Man reviews the same week they release. Plus, these seasonal episodes go up early on our Patreon as well, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. So a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that Mark and I do, over 400 episodes to put this show together. And so a special thanks goes out to our newest contributors this week, Nas, Aaron Shields, and Chulo.
Awesome. Thanks to all three of you. To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like J.M. DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz, Mark Bagley, David Michelini, and more, all of whom I believe have worked on Black Suit Spidey, right? I can't think of anyone we're missing there. Subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until we're found having ditched our clothes for paper bags on our heads, running naked through Central Park, what's our motto?
Yeah, it sounds like my Sunday evening, Dan. Well, our motto, of course, is with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.